before I start talking, I want to talk a little bit about origins as a writer, the way I actually became a writer, attuned to language. I was born and raised in southern Arizona, the oldest child of Mexican immigrants. So my parents did not understand or speak English for the longest time. So being the oldest child, it was my task, my responsibility to translate to my parents. So everywhere we went, the post office, the library, school meetings, the grocery store, the bank, I would translate. And I noticed from 9 to 10, around age 9 or 10, I noticed when I would speak, when I would translate to my parents, the person I was speaking to would always look at me, not at my parents. I noticed that. And it never bothered me until I was 12, 13, when I started feeling unease about who I was, my own identities. And it just amplified this feeling that, oh, my parents are not even in the room, even though they're speaking. Even though I'm mimicking the words, I'm echoing their words, but I'm the one who has kind of an authority over them in these kind of transactions. But the only place that didn't happen was in the library. The librarians always looked at my parents while I talked. And I noticed that really fast. And it was a very important and kind gesture. And it made me feel very comfortable, very welcomed in a library space. And that's the first time I actually visited the library when I was like over 13. I stayed there by myself. Because like I said, I felt welcomed and safe there. Because my parents were seen, acknowledged. And I remember that's the first time in my life, away from the home space, where two other siblings, where the TV is always on, a dog, a cat, and sometimes a bird that would escape that would recapture. All this noise was there. But in the library, silence. So it was the first time in my life I remember actually listening and actually hearing the world around me. I mean, there were small, soft sounds because of the library. But for the first time, I was very attentive to the sonics around me. And it's also the first time I started narrating to myself, this man is turning a book. This woman is sharpening her pencils way too loud. So it's the first time I became aware of a speaking voice within myself in a library space. So needless to say, I love libraries, and that the notion of having a book in a library actually thrills me to no end because of those origins. That's the moment I believe I became a writer, or my first path to becoming a poet, because I started jotting down what I heard, my observations, and then of course you lead from that to writing like pseudo-song lyrics, then to essays and poetry in high school. But the origins was me being surrounded by silence and being attentive for the first time. So before we start, I want you to think about the first time in your life that you heard the world around you, the noise around you. Was it a walk through the woods? Was it your mother, grandmother, or father telling you a story? The first time you felt in the world, you could listen to it. Just think about that for a few minutes. Maybe it hasn't happened. And if you're a writer, I think most of us here are writers or have aspirations to be writers. I think most of us have a notebook, a physical notebook. I would encourage you, I always do this, every time I buy a notebook, I always write down that incident in the front page of my notebook. And it's there as a touchstone, as a keystone, as a telegram for me to remember my origins as a writer. So I think that may be very helpful and beneficial to remember our passion for the world, for the word, which comes first to the ear. Okay, everybody has sheet paper? We're going to do a little exercise. I think it's very common in writing creative writing workshops. It's one of my favorite ones. It's called an I Remember. We need a kind of a rough draft of a poem So you can springboard, do other things to make it a top. And I remember poem is like, just you start jotting down the phrase, I remember, and then let your memory take over. Use all your senses. I remember the color of the moon on my 13th birthday. And just keep on going. Try to hit 20 lines. Okay, so starting now. So I remember, I remember, I remember. Don't worry about making it a poem or poetic. Let your memory take over. Let your senses take over. Try to remember with all your senses. I remember the taste, I remember the sound, I remember the texture. If you ever have the opportunity to work with high school students and middle school students, and you do this I would encourage you to do this exercise. It's a poetry workshop, creative writing workshop. Their memory is so amazing, their imagination is so amazing. And you can steal what they write. Just want to say, my first book, there's like I used to be a Head Start teacher for 2 years, and there's 3 or 4 images from that book that came straight out of the mouths of my students. Okay, please, 1 more minute. Just keep on going. Don't overthink it. I remember, I remember. I remember the sound of my mother's voice on the front porch. I remember the wind chimes. Okay, but the rest of us, some of us are sort of finishing up. Does anyone volunteer a couple other I remember lines? I will point.
I remember the clicking noises the bugs made when they hurled themselves against the windows at night.
Oh, you Hannah? If I know your name, you're in trouble.
I remember the first time I saw you.
Anybody else? A couple more.
I remember the terrible irritation of chicken pox.
And we all remember that one. I remember my brother had chicken pox before me in high school, and I would peek my head into his room and laugh at him. And of course, the next week, I wasn't being laughed at. It was terrible. Karma. Okay, one more. George, how many, please?
I remember 9 white pelicans gliding in a line between the wings off Tybee.
Okay. Everybody kind of catching up? Okay, I'm going to give a little talk about the music in poetry and the idea of breaking multiple selves into our work. So we cast out ourselves into the world, enlarging our homes, enlarging our presence in the world, moving away from binaries. I'm strictly X, Y, and Z. No, we're more than just what we label ourselves or what others label ourselves. There's always a moment in my revision process that I feel like I'm going to give up, that I want to give up. The lines won't tighten, the syllables spin out of control, the images wilt on the page. It's frustrating, but it's part of the deal of being a writer. But I have found kind of an easy remedy for me. I write at the top of the page in big, bold letters, "Here be monsters." Then I turn over the page and begin again. "Here be monsters" is, of course, the warning, the text ancient map makers used to inform explorers they were venturing into unknown waters. Right at the top of your paper right now, at the top of your poem, "Here be monsters." Big, bold letters. I stumbled upon this little trick about 6 years ago, and it hasn't failed me yet. Now I'll probably have to curse myself, because it always gets that energy going again. In my imagination, language is like an ancient map. Most of the world is illustrated, named, but there's always a part of the map that remains blank that might contain monsters. It's this unknown part of the map of language that always fascinates me as a poet. I want my poems to dwell there, and the work of my favorite contemporary poets already dwell there. C.D. Wright, Henri Cole, Bridget Beechen Kelly, Ray Almontrot, Rebecca Lindenberg. What do I mean by unknown language? We all remember Christopher Columbus. He didn't, we know he didn't discover a new world. He stumbled onto different ways of speaking, of seeing, of thinking. Unknown language, to me, to my ears, to my mind, is music and images that already exist in the world, but which haven't been articulated or mapped out. I find this very empowering as a poet, because the new is within grasp, within reach. It's not something that's unattainable only to geniuses or masters of our craft. It's accessible to us. One way, I believe, and I think I try to move to one way to move toward unknown language is by listening carefully to the language already around us, to unpack it, to rupture it, to kind of separate sense and meaning. The poem you just wrote, the 20 lines you just wrote, try to isolate a phrase or bit of language that interests you sonically, that kind of lingers in your ear or your mind. A couple words, 3 words, phrase, a bit of language. I live in New York City, and when I walk around the city, I can't read on the subway. I can't read in public spaces. What kind of writer am I in the city? But what I do, what comforts me is I carry a bit of language in my head, in my skull. Usually something I'm thinking about that I want to work or to develop into a phrase or a line. And just walk around with those syllables like ricocheting in my head. What I do, and what I want you to do on your piece of paper, is to isolate your bit of language, your phrase. For me, lately, this 2 words keep obsessing me. Paper jazz. I still have no idea where this wants to go in my work. But what I keep doing in my head is I keep rupturing and splicing the syllables into almost, well, into nonsense. What I want you to do, the same thing with your bit of language or phrase. Just, break it down into different combinations. I mean, it comes out sounding very silly, It's a good thing I don't, utter this nonsense when I'm walking around the city, otherwise I become one of those writers people avoid. But I like pa, per job, per jazz, pa, paper, pa. It sounds ridiculous, but I walk around the city having those words, those sounds ricochet in my skull. Have you guys broken down your phrase? Just go for it. Just make it nonsense. Create a new type of music. Also remember when you were children, the way you would repeat words and phrases again and again. One word had magic. Of course, your parents were frustrated with you because you repeated that word for weeks. But for you, that word was everything. It became almost a dwelling that you lived inside of. And you kept exploring that dwelling, going from window to window, room to room, floor to floor, trying to explore it, seek it out, what's going on, what's hidden in that word, in that phrase. It reminds me of scat singers. I don't know if you know what scat singers are, but they're people who were they were aware of mouth music. The sound that came out of the mouth. They were aware of the sounds and the shapes their mouth made. I think as young writers, especially poets, we need to be aware of mouth music because it trains the mind, trains our poetic unconscious to find pleasing sonic patterns in the language around us. It trains us to fashion new music through syntax, inventive diction, out of old music. The old music is the language already around us that we're saturated with. But there's a way to make it new, and one of those ways is to make it nonsense. Because you keep training your ear, your poetic unconscious, to find patterns, sonic patterns in the language all around you. And hopefully that transfers to your drafting. When you're drafting, you notice sonic patterns. Because one of the greatest things about a piece of a poem is its sonic structure. It's what holds a lot of poems together. Most people say that's what holds all the poems together. Let's look at this Andre Coe poem, Hymn. I don't want to read this poem out loud, so I'm going to ask someone, a few of us, to read this poem simultaneously. Who wants to do it? Okay.
Hens. It's good for the ego when I call and they come, running, squawking, and clucking, because it's feed time. And once again, I can't resist picking up little Lazarus, an orange and white bullet I adore. Yes, yes, everything will be okay, I say to her glaring mongrel face. Come September, she'll begin to lay the blue-ring eggs I love poached. God dooms the snake to taste nothing but the dust, and the 10 to 4,000 or so ovulations. Poor Lazarus. Last spring an intruder murdered her sisters and left her garroted in a coop. There's a way the wounded light up a dark rectangular space. Suffering becomes a universal theme. Too soft, and you'll be squeezed. Too hard, and you'll be broken. Even a hen knows this, posing on a manure pile, her body a stab of gold.
I'm like shaking out here. Andre, why did you write this poem? I wanted to write something this good. We all want to write something this good. Let's concentrate on the poor Lazarus inwards. Poor Lazarus all the way to who? In the middle of the second line from it. I want you to try to decipher and pull out the sonic patterns you see in those lines. Alliteration, consonants, consonants. What kind of sound are coming out there?
Hers and love.
Murder,
Murder.
Murder, true, charity. Her, for,
What else do you guys see there?
the S's.
The S's, the sibilants, yes. What's he doing with poor and coop?
almost reversing it.
How?
It's a visual play on words almost.
Oh, yeah. And he has a clutch of O's, isn't it? Pretty quite stunning what he did with it. That visual construct he did. Now, my favorite part of this poem is there's a way the wounded light up a dark rectangular space.
Yeah.
I remember reading this poem in Atlantic Monthly, I think, when it came out years ago. And copying that in my notebook. And in parentheses, damn, why not me? Let's try to unpack what I think is the beauty of this, the inherent beauty of this. There's a way the wounded light up a dark rectangular space. In the context of this poem, what do you think that moment, pardon the pun, shines? What can argue is for the preceding lines that we isolated already, that the music in those lines, the sonics in those lines, are in service to a very violent act. No? Murder, garroted, and of course we're talking about pens here, but still, it's a very violent act. The beauty of the next lines is there's a way the wounded, the next sentence, there's a way the wounded light up a dark rectangular space. He allows the mind, the reader, to kind of gather up all that wound, that damage, the wounding, that kind of violence, and let it glow in the mind. As previously, the music glowed on the page, shined on the page. But the very next sentence, after that gruesome scene, lets the music actually take on another kind of effect in the mind of the reader. It glows that dark rectangular space. And it's not only referring to the coupe, it's referring more to the poem itself. It's a little rectangular space. It's 3 verse songs. Okay? So I just want to point out the way that mouth music, the way of sonics, adds to the meaning, the music, the beauty, the visual interest in a poem. Maybe even if you're not a poet or have a full-time interest in being a writer, I think it's very beneficial to be present in the world, being aware of the language around you, and finding some kind of pleasure in it. No? Otherwise, we're just passive receivers of what's going around us. Another way to move toward unknown language, in my opinion, is to remember what Buck women told us. I contain multitudes. My favorite poets know the self, its construction. not a singular thing, but plural. Various speaking selves competing to articulate themselves in a life or on the page. Let me pause here. The key words are like our construction and plural. I'm not a scholar by any means. I come to poetry as a practitioner, but most of us, even with a high school education or first years in undergrad, know that social and historical, just to name two, pressures shape and contain us, contain our identities. I think that's kind of, we're aware of that now. But we also know that we are more than just one thing. Me, for example, I'm gay, I'm a male, I'm a Chicano, I'm a firstborn, I'm a Star Trek fan, I'm nearsighted, etc., etc. I'm all those, but I'm also upgrading everything I am. These identities, that's why I'm interested in most work, in my own work. It's identities, be it given or inherited, or invented too. Given or invented. So on your piece of paper, I want you to write at least 5 self-applied identities, things you feel comfortable calling yourself. A farmer, a cook, middle child, left-handed, Catholic, Mormon, Hindu. Cheer. Astronaut. Is there an astronaut on your phone? These identities, my speaking selves, are tethered to the world. My body, my intelligence, my heart is linked with specific realities. In my first book, I tried to convert this tethering, these linkages, these connections, into lines of verse. How? Well, I tried to make sure that all parts of myself, all my speaking selves, were present on the page. I had no interest in writing a first book that was just a book full of gay poems, or a book just Chicano poems, or a book of just Southwest poems. I wanted to write, pardon the ambition, something new. I wanted to dwell in unknown language, the unknown part of the map. I don't know if I succeeded, but I know the book does contain poems that have a speaker that leaps from identity to identity to identity. Here, a queer moment. Another moment rims with Spanish slang. The very next moment riffs on the work of Robert Hayden, an African-American poet. This constant braiding of speaking selves, of the personal and the world, produces something new. It's simple if you think about it. Each of us is unique. Our connections to the world are unique. I think it stands to reason that if we articulate those connections, our uniqueness on the page, we will, over time, cultivate a voice that's unique. Something that gestures to all the selves inherent in a person who contains multitudes. I want you to pick 3 of your identities that you self-label yourself. Just pick 3 identities. Put one near top, middle, bottom of the page. we're going to try to reel another exercise. Make the first line or sentence, and the middle one and the third one, a statement of that identity. I am a woman. The second one, I am from the Midwest. The third, I am a softball player. Whatever. Write those down, those identities down, okay? You get it. I think many young writers, especially young poets, falsely assume just by putting words on the page that those words are gesturing to the totality of their being. But that's not often the case, because people tend to fixate on one aspect of themselves. I remember with these poems, my first book, I have readers keep saying, oh, that's a gay poem. I go, you can call it a gay poem, but there's also, that poem's also set in the border, and it has an undocumented speaker. So it's more than just a gay poem. Oh, that poem is about your father. Yeah, that's just about my father. But the other part of the poem is about queer desire in some aspect, so it's more than just that. I think it has to be an active pursuit of this constant braiding of our multiple selves into our work. Otherwise, the work becomes insular, anecdotal. It becomes one room in a house. So quickly, let's write a poem. Write a poem about. Start with the first statement and work your way to the end. See what happens. If you know a foreign language, if you have a mother tongue, incorporate some of that language into your poem. If you're a lacrosse player, a football player, volleyball player, include, plug in the jargon of your sport. If you're bored to death, plug in some dialogue of the last good movie you saw into your phone, which was Mama for me. Don't watch it, it's really scary. I think as poets, especially young writers, young poets, I know, especially me, when I first started writing poetry, it's easy to, I can say they're terrible poems, they're bad poems. I mean, my teacher saw something in them, but they were bad because I allowed myself to be led by memory. I thought a poem was an exercise in truth-telling. I was trying to, I thought it was an exercise of reliving an anecdote or, painting a photograph that hung on the walls of my family home. No. In poetry, I think, the best kind of poetry, the most exciting poetry being written today, subject matter is secondary. Language is king. And like the earlier exercise, if you train yourself to notice sonic patterns and notice the way syllables play with each other, leap over each other, rupture each other, you have a good first step of learning how to follow language, how to listen to it. Also, when you're a young writer, especially a young poet, trust your instincts, trust your ear. If you have a notebook or even on your iPhone, your smartphones. Anytime a bit of language, or any kind of sensory detail in the world makes you pause, be it because out of wonder, out of disgust, or whatever other emotion, sentiment, you should always honor that pause by jotting it down in a notebook, making note of it. That's your unconscious, your whatever poetic unconscious telling you to pay attention for a reason. I think some of the best phrasing, some of the best imagery in my book came out of this attentive listening, making note of the pauses, honoring those pauses. You will get them in the oddest places all the time. In the subway. For me in the New York City, here's a trick I do in the subway system. I have the earbuds. I put them in if I don't listen to music. Then I sit down next to a family or somebody who's like arguing with a lover or something like that. I look for trouble. And I sit down next to this group of people, and it's terrible, I eavesdrop, that's what I do. But they feel confident or secure talking around me because you can see those earbuds, right? I think that I'm zoned out. That had some amazing things. I mean, I remember a couple months ago, a young woman, she must have been 17, was talking to her mother. She told her, "I hate the mirror because it makes me look like you." I thought it was kind of stunning, a mother might be in therapy for the rest of her life. To me, that's like plugging into a future poem. Or heard an elderly woman, she must have been in her 60s, dressed in black, she was mourning. So she's just very softly and gently said to, I thought somebody who looked like a nephew or something, "My high heels are killing me. Let's go back to the funeral." I do another thing with the sonics again. The poem you just wrote right now, I want you to pull out, make a little list of all the A sounds that you wrote down. Then a list of all the O sounds. Work with all the vowels sounds. Make a little list of all the vowel sounds you're pulling out. The ones you can pick out. Some of the vowels that seem hard, to my ear, very hard to pull out. It took me a long time to learn how to scan a line, how to notice a meter in a line. I think I do have a learning disability. I'm always transposing sounds in my mind, numbers. When I write down the word, the error, I write THE, I always leave off the E of the error, because in my mind I already see it attached. Pull out the vowels you can sound, all the vowel sounds, the words, come out. Okay. Now with all the vowel-centric words, I want you to come up with an interesting, one or two interesting phrases or an interesting bit of language. Does that have to make sense? Just reposition those and make a new shapes, not shapes, new forms. Put two words together to make an interesting phrase, a bit of language. Doesn't make sense at all. Just make some mouth music, something that's sonically pleasing. Another way to train your ear as a young writer, especially as a young poet, I'm saying especially as a young poet, is when you read a prose, an essay, you come upon a foreign language, which is more common nowadays. Before you Google translate it, I want you to utter those words, utter those sounds, see what you can come up with. Notice the sounds that dominate those words, those foreign languages. If it's a language you can you can actually make sense of sonically. And then do something with those sounds. Try to see how the sonics, that noise, that music of that foreign language or word, how it's interacting with the music of the English word before it and after it. It's there for a reason, not just meaning-wise, but I think the good writers, especially the good poets, have sonic, have worked the poets out sonically. I tried to do that when I first wrote. There's a lot of Spanish slang I work, Spanish. But even if you don't, hopefully, if you don't understand the meaning of the Spanish, you will understand the sonics of it. Because I worked hard for it to fit a pattern within the English words. Okay, does anyone want to come up with a volunteer, just say some of the phrases, the bits of language you came up with?
Two tiny ones, are any, and needed enough.
Needed enough, okay. Those are these. Anything else over here? Right here.
Hate tape.
Hate tape, okay. Anything else in this program? Anyways? Don't hesitate, just let it come out. I mean, you have to get your hands, your mind mess with that kind of stuff. Yes?
Word limit.
Word limit. I think that's actually a beautiful bookstore somewhere.
Really?
Yeah, okay. That's great. Anything else?
Word digger.
That's good.
Crash master.
Crash master, that's great, yeah. You don't want to see that in NASCAR. Well, maybe you do, yeah. Anything else?
Wish to give a gift.
Wish to give a gift. Isn't that beautiful? The song to that. Very lovely. Anything else? Just go for it. Yes, ma'am.
Wondrous body outside constrained.
See? Go for it. Let me ask a question here. How many are you keeping notebooks, or you started to write, or how many of you keep notebooks? And when you keep notebooks, are they just data banks, image banks, or are they, what do you write down? Because hopefully in notebooks you should also be writing sonically, jotting things sonically, even if it makes sense to you. I would encourage you to do that. Because you never know what you're going to get. Poets steal all the time. I'm always stealing the physical patterns of things given to me. We're going to do one more thing with this underscore poem. I was talking, or hopefully I was trying to talk about how important it is for the cells, the multiple speaking cells, to reach out beyond the boundaries of one's skin, beyond the boundaries of one world, one identity, and to connect to the world. My work connects itself because I'm a Chicano, Mexican-American, so I'm very interested, of course, in the harsh realities of people crossing the border. As a gay man, coming of age in the AIDS epidemic, I'm very interested, even now, in the plague, its history, its survivors, the lost voices. As a firstborn, I'm very interested in my family and other families, as to who is actually the favorite. It's me, by our appearances. So what I'm trying to say is, my selves, my identities, are linked to the realities of this world. And in this poem, Enrico is a gay man. It doesn't come across anywhere in the work, in this poem especially. It doesn't come in this poem across, unless somebody could read something that I haven't read. But I want you to pick out in this poem where he reels out, where he connects to the world, and then through allusion, reference. What kind of history is he talking about? What kind of bodies of knowledge, literature is he referencing, alluding to? The first one's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's what?
The Bible?
Yes, Lazarus, isn't it? Which was a man risen from the dead, so, by Jesus. Okay. What other kind of reading out do you see in this poem? This poem is not just it's not insular. It's not a type of about where the speaking self, one speaking self just narrates and talks, but his voice is casting out line after line to different bodies of knowledge. The Bible, yes?
Oh, another Bible was God dooms the snake to taste nothing but the dust. The Garden of Eden.
Yes, yes. What else can we see there? Isn't a bit of some kind of, where's the science bit coming?
Well, the courthouse was so obvious.
Yes, yes. I have a feeling Enrico Google that before. Imagine that like sticking in somebody's memory. You can say anything else? Anything else that kind of breaks the spell of one speaking self?
Actually, the wounded life
How?
seems very biblical to me too.
Yes. And to me, I also see it as kind of gesturing to the art world a little bit. Mark Rothko, his color fields. I don't know if you know that word, his word. I see that there in that moment there. Anything else? Yes.
I don't even think you said it, but it kind of makes like a Robert Frost kind of feel. Come September, you're talking about laying the eggs.
Yes. Robert Frost constructed persona of being a farmer or
Right.
of being wolf or that. Correct me, I don't think he was.
No.
I know, but yeah, like you have that vibe. Yeah. I happen to know that this poem originated after a stint at a summer colony, where one of his responsibilities was taking care of the chickens. Okay. He's not a farmer, but you get that impression. Yes.
The first line is good for the eater, when I call and they come.
Yeah.
The fact that he's talking about chickens, that it's kind of a humility. And
Yes. Wonderful, yes. Very good. Anything else we can glean out of here, please? We'll be here all day if it was up and talking about this poem.
Well, like this, that whole thing with suffering, the too soft you will be squeezed and too hard you'll be broken, so it's like finding the happy medium between just letting people walk over you or being so hard that you get snapped.
How about this? Even a hen knows of this. Posing on a manure pile, her body a stab of gold. What's that wording? First you got on a manure pile, her body a stab of gold.
There's a contrast.
Well, it's sort of a self-mockery.
Yes.
You can be posing, but
Posing on a manure pile, yes. That's the way it gets into it. Posing. Anything else? Pullet, the word pullet. An orange or white pullet, which I had to Google. I think I didn't, from the context, I think I figured it out, but I wanted to make sure. How about Mongo, please? So what, he's gesturing to a very specific region of the world, maybe. Yeah, of course he is. Let's do Rome. Let's do Rome. Let's do Rome in 7 days. Anyone want to volunteer to read this prose poem?
I'll read some of it.
Anybody else want to take over? Right, here,
I saw once in a rose garden a remarkable statue of the Roman she-wolf and her twins, a reproduction of an ancient statue. Not the famous bronze statue so often copied, in which the blunt head swings forward toward the viewer like a sad battering ram, but an even older statue of provenance less clear. The wolf had been cut out of black stone, made blacker by the garden's shadows, and she stood in profile, her elegant head pointed towards something far beyond her, her long, unmarked body and legs, narrow and more finely boned than the body and legs of wolves as we know them, possessed, it seemed, of a great stillness, like the saturated stillness of the roses, but tightly nerved, set on the instant to move. Somebody else?
Under her belly, somebody else, please.
Under her belly stood the boys, under her black breasts, not babes as one might expect, but two lean boys cut from the same shadowed stone as the wolf, but disproportionately small, grown boys, no bigger than starlings, though still, like the wolf, oddly fine in face and lens. One boy pressing 4 fingers again, one long breast, his other cupped beneath it to catch the falling milk. The second boy wrapping both arms around another breast, as if to carry it off, neither boy suckling, both instead turned toward you, dreamy, sweetly sly, as if to chide you for interrupting their feeding, or as if they were plotting a good trick. Beautiful, those boys among the roses. Beautiful, the black wolf. But it was the breast that held the eye. A double row of 4 black breasts, 8 smooth breasts, each narrowing to a strict point, piercing, sharp, exactly the shape of the ivory tooth of the shark.
I had the pleasure of listening to Bridget Clay read at a conference in '09. I'm not going to lie to you, but she's probably my favorite American poet writer right now. And I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, I walked out weeping after she read and just sat among the trees under the stars, grateful for her work. That's my son. Fanboy there. First of all, let's pull out the sonics out of this poem. Come on. Give me a couple phrases, a bit of language that kind of sonically rings after you.
Sad battering ram.
Yes. And that personification is kind of odd, isn't it? A sad. A mopey battering ram. It needs a cup of warm water. Any other sonics that you can pull out?
Saturated stillness.
Yes. Do that. What else can you pull out?
Shadowed stone.
Yes. Very good.
Boys no bigger.
Yes.
Oddly fine of face.
Yes. Okay. In this poem, there's an absence of what? Yes, it's a prose poem. It's a prose poem. Which, first of all, if we talk about the shape, it's really ingenious. Ideally, it's supposed to be just a paragraph. The line breaks. The right margins, they're all flushed. It's a clean little rectangle of prose. So it's a little block, a little stone block of words that when she's talking a poem, it's about sculpture, isn't it? It's pretty stunning, that move there. But I'm talking about the speaker of this poem. Can you tell that the speaker is X, Y, and Z? Can you or not? It's not explicitly told, said, is it? She doesn't say, speaker doesn't announce, I'm a mother. But there's plenty of textual evidence that the speaker is a mother, right? Because her gaze is so focused on what?
The breasts.
The breast, the boys.
The boys
Yes. And the speaker,
and the sheep.
the speaker speaks like somebody, like a mother, huh? Catching what one of my favorite lines says, when she catches the boys really shy, turning their head, as if it were plotting a good trick. I think most parents know that look, don't they? She's got it. And what else? How is she reading out? I mean, the title of the poem gives us a clue, like how is she connecting, how is the speaker connecting this female speaker, this mother speaker, I think it's safe to say, a mother speaker, how is she connecting her reality to something greater than just her personal self? What kind of, she's talking about what? What kind of myth there?
The founding.
Mission world.
Yeah.
That's the scaffolding that she's using for this poem.
Yeah.
To connect herself, to build a world around one speaking self here, his mother.
Well, and then
Yes.
the mother is essential, but so much less than what those children will be.
Yes.
Well, the other thing that I thought was interesting is, I mean, she starts with the rose garden, but she's got the ivory tooth of the shark, which is a very sharp and powerful thing.
There-
It's soft and the sharp.
Yeah. And also the inherent violence of the shark too, you know, the devour, maul. But also roses have thorns to them, so there's a great little looping up, a linkage from beginning to end here. I mean, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful poem, sonically beautiful. Just the imagery is amazing. But what we said about the roses, but tightly nerves set. I see that. I see, for some reason, I think of my mother's like velvet paintings of the Virgin Mary with those roses underneath her feet. Anything else about this poem that stands out for you?
I wonder why she uses statue so many, those same words so many times right at the beginning.
Yes. Somebody want to venture forth?
Well, she's contrasting, I mean, it's really very famous sculpture,
Yes.
and she's saying it's not that one that does this. This is a more ancient one. I mean, she's just transporting you to a different time period and something that's even more primeval, to me.
Anything else? Okay. What I want you to do with this poem is to isolate what you think is the most beautiful sonic phrasing, the most beautiful phrasing musically. Just isolate it. That's something I always do. I have trained myself as a reader, because in poetry there's such a spectrum. There's avant-garde, you know, from the avant-garde, crazy, to the traditional forms. I have trained myself as a reader to always find something to enjoy in whatever poem I read. Something, be it the title sometimes. Sometimes it's the use of white space, that's all I'm left to. Or, but I have trained my ear and myself to find pleasure in every poem I read. Because I usually find that that bit of pleasure, usually for me, an image of pleasure, because I'm also fascinated with metaphor and simile, becomes a lens for me to understand the poem. But just isolate the most beautiful sounds you use in the poem, the phrasing. Okay, you write it down. Keep with you. And if you would do me the favor of humoring me, walk around with that phrase, a bit of language for a while. Carry it inside of you, your mind. Break it down. Rearrange those syllables into nonsense. I think it's very important for writers, once again I'm going to say, especially poets, to carry music as much as is humanly possible inside of them, with them, at all times. I think we don't have much to do 333. Still want to open it up to any questions about anything I said, or anything about poetry writing, writing life in general. Where I got the shoes. Nothing about the writing life? No?
I want to see your shoes now.
Nice little flowers, nice little flowers. So embarrassed. You tell yourself, not a job, not a job. Anything else? What did you, yes?
I just, do you ever write a poem that you hate, but other people think is really, really good?
What? All my early stuff, yes. But there, in my book, there are poems that I thought, oh, they serve a purpose in the management of the order, and I like them. But people tend to love those poems, and I'm like, don't waste your time, please, for the stars of the book. But yeah, it's something you learn as a writer that sometimes writers are the worst judge of their own work, and also once it's out in the world, it's no longer yours. So appreciate, somebody appreciates your work. So I learned to keep my mouth shut, like, oh, good. Or poems and friends are like, I can't believe you didn't publish that poem in the book. It's my favorite, that's the best thing you've written. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. You're no friend of mine. But just appreciate the intention. It's bound to happen. It's bound to happen because, and also because you develop as a writer too here. So your earlier strategies and stylistic tics change, so what they use, people who first read you might become accustomed to a style of voice, and once you switch out of it, they might not like that voice. So it's got to keep evolving as a writer. Yes?
How often do you rewrite your poems, or how, can you talk a little bit about your process?
I finished my MFA in 2001, and my first book was picked up in 2010. It took me 9 years to finish my first collection. But in between those years, I wrote about 3 manuscripts worth of poems. And I'm always revising. I'm passionate about revising. I enjoy it. Nerd alert. I enjoy revising. One thing I do, when I publish in a journal or in an anthology, I always open the journal or the anthology and I take a Sharpie to that poem on the pages of the journal. And I start tweaking again. Oh, I think that comma, that title needs to be adjusted. I don't always keep the revisions, but I just to constantly remind myself the work of craft is never, ever done. Anything else?
How long are your poems generally?
Probably most of the poems in the book, less than a page. When you talk about a lyric, it's mostly a page. But it could be, you can write whatever you want. Especially online, a lot of online videos that allow young writers to publish longer poems and longer sequences. So that's kind of interesting. That kind of opportunity via print is very limited. So maybe that's the reason why practicing poets don't work so much in the long form, because there's no way to publish it outside of a book. But hopefully the online community would change that. Anything else? Well, I just want to leave you with just awareness of sonic patterns of music around you, especially if you're a writer. Okay? Be aware of the music and carry it with you. I have a young writer friend who keeps saying, I don't have time to write. I go, just carry one line of verse that you're working on inside of you. You're working. Okay? Thank you so much. I'll be here to answer any questions.